The scariest thing in a medieval manuscript was never the dragon curled up in the margin. It was the calm man at your bedside who knew which vein to open and knew which day the stars told him to open it. We carry this idea of the Middle Ages where every threat has a teeth, a beast on a hill, a creature a knight has to ride out and kill. The thing most likely to actually damage a medieval body was nothing like that. It was the local healer, the abbey infirmarian, the university physician, all of them doing their confident best with a model of the human body that was wrong at the root. So let me take you to a spring morning in England, somewhere around the year 900. There is a book later known as Bold's Leechbook, and it tells you that spring is the season to be bled. Not because anything is wrong with you, because staying in balance means letting some blood out before the warm months tip you the wrong way. A vein gets opened, the blood runs into a bowel, and the timing has already been checked against the calendar. Some of those calendars folded down small enough to hang from your belt, and inside one you would find a painted figure with his organs and limbs parceled out among the 12 signs of the Zodiac, a diagram informing you that the heavens owned your body in sections. That figure has a name, the Zodiac Man. He has a cousin called the Vein Man marked all over with the exact points where a blade should go in. These were not decorations, they were instructions. That is the entire argument of this video, so I will say it once and then spend the rest of the time proving it. The real menace of medieval Europe was not the thing in the legend. It was a sophisticated, organized, deeply respected system of medicine practiced on living people, built on mistake. To understand why any of this happened, you have to get inside the theory, because there genuinely was one. Medieval learned medicine was not people throwing herbs at a wall and praying over the result. At its center sat the four humors: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. Four fluids, each tied to a pairing of qualities: hot or cold, wet or dry, and the idea was that your health was the balance between them. Hold them in proportion and you stayed well. Let one run high or turn corrupt and you got sick. Your particular mix even defined your personality, your complexion in the old sense of the word, the temperament you were born with. A blood-heavy person was supposed to run warm and sociable, a black bile person to lean toward gloom, and so on down the four. Character and illness came off the same chart. What threw the balance off? Almost anything could. Food, the season, your age, your feelings, the air around you, all of it fed into the mix. Diagnosis ran on the same logic. He would study your urine, hold it to the light, judge its color and its cloudiness, a practice called uroscopy that turns up everywhere in the manuscripts. He took your pulse, he asked what you had eaten, how you had slept, what season it was, what your stars were doing. Out of all that, he assembled a picture of which humor had gone wrong and in which direction. The first move was often not a knife or a drug at all. It was regimen. Adjust the diet, change the air, manage sleep and exercise and the passions, nudge the whole life back toward balance. This part honestly was not stupid. Telling a sick person to rest, eat differently, and get out of foul air is advice that survives in spirit to this day. Medieval practitioners could be sharp observers, and nursing a patient through an illness was something they did know how to do. The qualities ran the entire pharmacy. If a sickness was judged hot and dry, you answered it with something cooling and moistening. A fever was an excess of heat, so the logic said cool it down and draw off the hot, spoiled blood, feeding it. Every plant, every food, every drug carried its own rating on those same scales, and the physicians matched the remedy to the imbalance the way you would answer a question with the opposite. The air part matters more than its sound. When plague theory needed an explanation, the learned answer was bad air. Corrupt, poisoned air, thick with rot, what later writers would call miasma. You breathed it in, it carried putrefaction into the body, and it spoiled the humors from inside. This is a clean, logical, and completely mistaken chain of cause and effect, and you can see why it held. People could smell death in a plague city. Linking the smell to the sickness was a reasonable guess. It was also wrong, and acting on it did nothing to slow the dying. Humors and bad air were the natural side of the explanation. They were not the only side. Sickness could also come from outside the natural world entirely. Some of the oldest English remedies treat illness as the work of something hostile and unseen, a demon, a malign creature that had gotten into you. Running right alongside that, you had sin. Illness could be a punishment or at least a signal that the soul needed tending as much as the body. Confession was thought to help you physically recover. The priest and the healer were working the same patient from two directions, and nobody at the time felt a contradiction. Body, soul, air, and stars were one continuous system. You treated all of it, or you treated none of it. The stars are not a fringe add-on either. Astrology sat near the dead center of medieval medicine. The scholar Hilary Carey put it about as plainly as it can be put that astrology was at the heart of the whole enterprise, and the surviving objects back her up. Those folding almanacs I mentioned carried planetary tables, calendars, the Rain Man, the Zodiac Man, everything a physician needed to decide not only what to do, but when. One manuscript from the middle of the 1400s includes an actual table of good and bad days for bloodletting, a schedule. The body was a clock that had to be synchronized with the heavens before you cut it. And here's the part that lands hardest for me. There is a late medieval manuscript that contains an onomantic sphere, a device predicting whether a sick person would live or die. You fed it the patient's name, the day of the moon, the planetary day of the week, ran the numbers, and out came a verdict: live or die. Almost like a medieval ChatGPT. This sat inside the medical book next to remedies and recipes, and to the people using it, there was no clean line between diagnosis, prognosis, and fortune telling. The same hand that makes your medicine might also calculate whether you were already finished. None of this came from nowhere, and this is where the story gets genuinely impressive, even as the medicine stays wrong. After Rome fell, the medicine of the ancient Greeks did not vanish. Hippocrates and Galen survived in monasteries, in recipe books, in the practical know-how of people who kept caring for the sick. Galen especially became the spine of everything. The vocabulary, the humors, the logic, all of it is Galenic. For centuries, the monasteries carried a great deal of this, keeping the old texts, growing the herbs, nursing the sick in their infirmaries. The real turn came in southern Italy in the late 11th century with a translator known as Constantine the African. Southern Italy was a meeting ground of Latin, Greek, and Arabic, and Constantine pulled Arabic medical learning into Latin. He translated Hippocrates and Galen out of Arabic versions, plus Arabic medical treatises in their own right. A work by Ibn al-Jazar called the Viaticum traveled through that world in both Latin and Greek. This was knowledge bouncing across languages and religions and coastlines, landing in Europe and getting rebuilt into something teachable. Out of that activity came the most popular medical textbook of the later Middle Ages, the Articella. It was a bundle, a collection that pulled together Hippocrates, Galen, Hunayn ibn Ishaq, Theophilus, and Philaretus, all in Latin. Students learned from it for centuries right into the 1500s. The Avicenna's canon got folded into the picture, an enormous systematic encyclopedia that took Galen's scattered ideas and gave them an architecture. If Galen handed medieval medicine its words, Avicenna handed it a blueprint. By the 13th century, these texts were moving out of Salerno and into the new universities, Bologna, Ferris, Montpellier, where medicine became a faculty, a profession, a thing you got a degree in. A student there faced a standard stack of books that had traveled a long way to reach him. The aphorisms and prognostics of Hippocrates, Galen's Short's Primer de Tagny, an introduction by Hunin, and Avicenna's canon, all copied and bound and argued over together. I want to be honest about what it did, because the obvious read is that universities made medicine better. In one sense, fine. The teaching got more rigorous, the text got more standardized. The trouble is that all of it made a wrong system more confident. Once bloodletting and uroscopy and astrological timing were locked into textbooks and lectures and commentaries, they stopped being one healer's habit and became orthodoxy. They traveled further, they carried more weight. A bad idea with a university behind it is much harder to kill than a bad idea without one. The harm here grew out of certainty at least as much as out of ignorance. It's worth saying too that this was not only a world of men in lecture halls. Women's medicine had its own tradition centered on Salerno, gathered under the name of Trotula. For a long time, people told a tidy story about Trotula's being a single brilliant woman, the first female professor of medicine. The real picture, worked out carefully by a historian Monica Green, is messier and more interesting. Trotula is not one person and one book. It is a cluster of texts, composite, assembled over time, and widely influential across Europe. There was a real figure named Trota behind part of it, and surviving manuscripts preserve titles like the Liber Trotile and Trota on the Conditions of Woman. The point is that the most widely read writing on women's bodies in medieval Europe came out of this tangled, partly female tradition, not from a male scholastics alone. These texts were not abstract. They dealt with the parts of medieval life that killed women quietly and constantly, childbirth above all. Bringing a child into the world in this period was one of the most dangerous things a body could attempt, and the manuscript in women's conditions are a record of people trying to manage that with danger with the tools they had. Then there is Hildegard of Bingen, who does not fit any of the usual slots. She was a Benedictine abbess, a visionary, and one of the very few medieval women we can name as the author of medical works in her own right. She wrote two of them, Physica and Casia et Curae. Her medicine fused natural philosophy, religious vision, and close observation of the world around her, and she is a clean illustration of the medieval refusal to wall the body off from the soul and the cosmos. To Hildegard, a plant, a sin, a planet, and a symptom were all part of one fabric. So that is the theory and the prestige. Now, the part that would actually happen to you. Almost every major medieval intervention shared one underlying logic. Sickness was an excess, a corruption, a thing that had gotten in. So the cure was to take something out. Get the bad stuff to leave. Let's start with the one you already know. Bloodletting, venesection. You open the vein, usually with a small blade called a lancet, and you let controlled amount of blood out to drain of the excess or the corruption. It was timed by season, sometimes by the Zodiac, and it was so routine that Bold's Leechbook recommends it on a calendar as preventive care for the healthy people. When opening a vein was awkward, or when you wanted blood from one specific spot, you reached for leeches instead. Set them on the skin to pull blood out of a hot, inflamed, congested area. By modern standards, here is the problem, and I want to flag this as clearly as present-day judgment rather than something medieval physician could have measured. Bleeding a sick person again and again does not rebalance anything. It can leave them weaker, more anemic, closer to collapse. Drawing blood is known to cause fainting and a drop in blood pressure, even in a calm modern clinic with a trained nurse standing by. Do it repeatedly and someone already burning hot with fever, and you are removing the very thing their body is fighting to hold on to. The leeches carry their own bile. Bleeding that would not stop, and infection, in a world with no concept of bacteria and nothing on the shelf to fight them. The same subtractive thinking drove the purges. purgatives to empty bowels from above, clysters to flush them from below, all aimed at expelling whatever noxious matter you had collected inside. On a healthy body, unpleasant. On a body already wrecked by fever, by dysentery, by an inability to keep food or water down, strong purging is a quiet catastrophe. It strips out fluid and the salt, the body runs on, and it shoves a dehydrated patient further down toward the edge. Again, that is modern reading. The medieval logic was internally consistent. Bad matter inside, force it out. It just happened to be aimed at the wrong target with the wrong tools. Herbs are where I will give the period some real credit because the picture there is not uniform. Medieval medicine ran on single plant remedies and on compound drugs blended to cool or heat or dry or moisten a patient according to humoral need. The manuscripts are full of herbals, antidottories, recipe books, plant lists, careful drawings of things like the mandrake. Some of it worked. A number of plants have real pharmacological action, and the people using them were often watching closely to see what helped. The trouble is that the same shelf held remedies that did nothing and remedies that were outright poisonous, and the theory gave you no reliable way to tell them apart. A real pharmacy, stocked half with medicine and half with hazard, sorted by a system that could not actually sort it. Then there is surgery, and this is where the gap between then and now opens into a canyon. Medieval surgeons were not fools. They set fractures, treated fistulas and ulcers, closed wounds, handled the grim aftermath of the battlefields. Big names anchored the high medieval period, men like Guy the Chauliac, whose Chauria Magna appeared in 1363, and the English surgeon John Narderne, who built reputation by treating one of the most miserable conditions a fighting man could carry. They wrote it down, illustrated it, and then passed it on. Surgical manuscripts survived covered in drawings of instruments and wounds, among them a figure catalogues called the Wound Man, a single body structure with every injury a person could suffer at once, sword and arrow and club and animal bite, each one key to the passage that told you how to treat it. A grim index of everything that could happen to flesh. What those surgeons lacked were two things that make modern surgery survivable. No anesthesia, no antisepsis. A patient was awake or drugged into a haze that did not come close to numbing what was about to happen, while a man cut into living tissue with tools that had never even heard of sterilization in a room thick with whatever was in the air. Cautery meant pressing hot iron to flesh to stop bleeding or burn away disease with nothing for the pain but restraint and luck. The honest verdict from people who study this is blunt. Operations often failed, and the baseline risk sat on a different planet from what we assume when we hear of the word surgery today. Amputation, cautery, the knife going into the conscious body in a contaminated room. More frightening than any beast in any margin because it was real and it was done on purpose to people who had no better option. The period went further than a knife too. There is solid evidence that Anglo-Saxon England and across the longer history of surgery for trepanation, drilling or cutting a hole straight to the skull. The reason could be physical, a head injury, a fracture, pressure that needed relief, and in the broader tradition it was sometimes reached for in cases of seizures or what they called madness. Cutting open a living skull with pre-modern tools, no real anesthetic, no defense against infection. Some people survived it. The fact that survival was even possible is the strange part. The risk does not need any exaggerating from me. While all of this was the everyday machinery of medieval medicine, the actual scale of death in this world had nothing to do with monsters. The Black Death tearing through Europe between 1347 and 1352 is estimated to have killed somewhere around a third of the continent. Some accounts push that to half. Take even the lower figure and hold it next to a dragon for a second. One of those things emptied cemeteries across the whole continent inside 5 years. The other one filled a corner of a page. The medicine at this time, for all of its books and theory and university faculties, could essentially do nothing against it because it was reaching for bad air and planetary timing while the real killer moved unseen. Think about what a medieval person would actually have to fear in their own body. Headaches that would not lift, wounds that went hot and septic, skin diseases, hernias, paralysis, chronic pain with no name and no relief, and the long odds of childbirth with the threat of an epidemic that could empty a town hanging over all of it. None of these fears were answered by a knight with a lance. They were answered, if they were answered at all, by the healer with his bowl and his calendar. So let me come back to the dragons because they earned their place in the title, just not the place you would expect. Dragons were genuinely everywhere in medieval Europe. The people who catalog these manuscripts have a hard time finding one without a dragon hiding somewhere in it. They coiled through bestiaries and herbals and histories and legends and the great apocalyptic visions. St. George ran one through with a lance in one of the most popular stories of age. The medieval imagination was soaked in dragons. The catch is what kind of thing a dragon was. The dragon was a symbol. It stood for evil, for the demonic, for spiritual combat, for the monstrous and foreign, and the artists who drew them could not even agree on what they looked like, which tells you these were creatures of meaning rather than biology. A dragon told you what to fear in your soul. It never bled you in your bed. A painted dragon is a story about danger. A Rain Man is a set of directions for performing it. One lives on the page, the other one came to your house with a bile and a blade. One famous manuscript packs the whole anxious world into a few pages. The wound man bristling with every injury at once, bleeding man marked with the astrological signs, a pregnant woman, a caesarean birth, and a run of images showing nothing but the signs of approaching death. That is medieval medicine looking at itself and not one dragon anywhere in it. A few scraps of it did survive, oddly enough, which is the closest this story comes to a happy ending. Draining blood as a treatment still exists, but only for a short list of specific conditions like hemochromatosis, where the body really does carry too much iron. Leeches are back in hospitals, used by reconstructive surgeons to pull congested blood out of reattached tissue. The plant remedies became real pharmacology once dosage and testing replaced guesswork. Cutting into the skull survives as neurosurgery, and craniotomy done for a tumor or a bleed under anesthetic in a sterile room by someone who knows exactly why the hole is there. Every one of these work now because the wrong theory got stripped away and only the narrow tested core was kept. The Lancet, the Leech, the drill, the herb, more or less the same tools in a completely different world. The medicine finally stopped guessing, and that is the only reason it stopped being the monster.